I'm Doomsvince, and this is day 117 of Spawn Year.
Bendis ends this story in a completely unexpected and unintuitive way, when the man Sam and Twitch caught last issue turns out to really be the sole culprit responsible for the deaths of the Wiccan girls, and the tale becomes less about uncovering the sick mind behind a bizarre string of slayings and more about, all of a sudden, putting the Salem witch trials within the context of the Spawn universe, where real magic and devils and such actually exist. The suspect, AJ, is a direct descendant of the Reverend Nicholas Noyes, who tried to convince Sarah Good to confess she was a witch before she was hanged at Salem, Massachusetts in the late 1600s. The Reverend died of a hemorrhage soon after, and AJ believes Sarah really was a witch, that he is cursed, and that it was his duty to kill as many modern witches as possible before his inevitable, unstoppable death. He thinks he'll die the night he gets taken in by Sam and Twitch at midnight. Besides his ancestry, we're never told why he believes it will happen that night, or whether anyone else in his family was ever a victim of this supposed curse. Throughout the issue, we see glimpses of a witch casting some sort of spell, and then right after midnight, he suddenly dies that gruesome death he expects to. It too looks like a hemorrhage, but like his victims, salt is found in the wound. On the one hand, tying this whole thing to Salem struck me as a little too obvious and maybe even beneath this book. It seemed like the direction a regular Spawn story would probably go with this. Pick the most related, famous historical event and then act really clever for reinterpreting it for the world of Spawn. On the other hand, Bendis does it in a marginally interesting and thought-provoking way. In his version, there are real witches and they can cast real spells. Or at least, I'm pretty sure they can. And they're human beings just like everyone else. So just like in every religion, there are good ones and there are bad ones. And so the Salem trials were still an example of religious extremism, paranoia, and mass hysteria. It wouldn't have mattered to the Christian colonists at Salem the kind of witchcraft that was supposedly being practiced. It must have all been evil because it didn't conform to their standards of decency. And it's interesting that Bendis doesn't necessarily change or add to that history at all. Sarah Good still may not have been a witch. There probably was no curse, and the Reverend probably died of a natural hemorrhage, because AJ isn't killed by the curse, but by a spell performed by two of the remaining witches from the coven AJ kept going after. Or again, I think that's what happens. The spell was meant to bring back to its target tenfold what he reaped, good or bad, and that's why there's salt found when he dies. The witches aim the spell at whoever the murderer was. They claim they don't even know Sam and Twitch had a suspect. Which raises this question: why does their spell happen conveniently at the same time he thought he was going to die? Unless it's some sort of predestination thing, where the stars align in such a way to create the very curse he believed in only because he deserved it. Or something. I was expecting more expert misdirection and the seemingly random story elements gelling together by the end like we had in Udaku, and ultimately, while there's a lot of good here, it's unevenly paced and not altogether cohesive. There are several social and moral concerns introduced that quickly are dropped, and I hope to see more of those paid off in this story, but some of them might have been planted for later, which is perfectly understandable in an ongoing serialized narrative. What remains most consistent throughout is that this is a story about Sam Burke, a man who's very set in his ways, who's uncomfortable and not altogether tolerable of these victims' spiritual beliefs, but who is a good man dedicated to justice. The final scene is a powerful one, where Sam makes a real human connection with the girls. Earlier, Twitch dismissed AJ as a disturbed psychopath, barely responsible for his own actions, but Sam calls the killer's work methodical, and he passionately wants to see him go to trial. Twitch believes AJ, somehow and for some reason, set a sort of biological suicide bomb in himself to go off at midnight and fulfill his air-quote curse. But Sam, who still doesn't want to believe in magic, he must have hated those Ronald McDonald commercials that were out at the time, sees what's happening and demands the Wiccan girls tell him what they did to AJ. They explain the same spell through another story about a time they did that spell on a child rapist warlock in their coven so as not to implicate themselves, and they call the device they used to make the spell work the Blue Candle of Justice, and now they and Sam are speaking the same language. Everything about one's culture of belief is foreign to the other, but they all want the same thing: justice. For a moment, Sam and Twitch seem to be on a witch hunt of their own, but Sam didn't allow his doubts or fears or prejudice to cloud his judgment, as illustrated by the way they handle the warlock last issue. And recognizing that honesty and nobility, the Wiccans cast a good luck spell on Sam at the end. He doesn't know if he believes in it at all, and I love that there's plenty of reason for the reader to doubt all of that as well, but he makes a subtle connection, and I suddenly like him even more than I did before. The story takes an odd turn in this last issue, but at least the introduction and conclusion are very much on the same page. Not literally, that would be a very short arc. And the commentary on the complexities of religion versus the simplicity, at least in Bendis' view, of what makes a good human being is well handled. But I'm glad this was only 4 issues. Any more noodling about this religious philosophy and social bigotry might have left me with a salt-enhanced brain hemorrhage, or at least a Mountain Dew-enhanced one. Assuming that hasn't already happened. Signed, Captain Logan.